Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. I'm going to say it, I'm just going to come out and say it. January 24th. This is going to be the year of tritium for me. I am a self-confessed loom pig. I have made no less than 6 installments now of the Loom Wars series. I cannot get enough of the stuff. And yet every time I make one of those videos, there are at least a dozen comments from you saying, "Hey Jody, what are you doing? Why don't you get a tritium tube watch in there? It would wipe the floor with all of those competitors." And of course, you are all perfectly correct. It would. How could luminescent paint possibly hope to contend with small glass tubes containing radioactive gas that has a half-life of at least 25 years. So we're talking decades of glowing, not just hours or even minutes of glowing, as is sometimes the case with loom. Perhaps that's the reason why I've only reviewed 3 tritium tube watches on the channel to this point, knowing that once you have tritium, you'll never go back. And really, it was the marathon that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago that blew my mind and opened up my eyes once again to the power of tritium. And of course, that means I'm already on the case of finding the cheapest acceptable looking tritium watch on AliExpress. You can expect to see more videos in that regard over the coming weeks and months. But what if you want something a bit more upscale? What if you want a classic Gara watch, a go anywhere, do anything watch that's Swiss, has an automatic movement in it, and yet has tritium tubes? Well, you only really have one option, a name that has been synonymous with tritium for many, many years, that being Ball watches. Now, I haven't just bought this Ball Fireman Victory, not yet anyway. It is kindly on loan to me from a subscriber from Perth, Western Australia called Jeffrey. He got in touch before Christmas, said he had one of these balls, would I be interested in reviewing it on the channel? And I said, thank you, Jeffrey. I would, even though I know it's going to open a door for me that I probably can't close again. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. Okay, so while I take Jeffrey's ball out of its box, no sniggering up the back, please. I'm going to try and avoid all of that type of joke today about how I've handled another man's ball with care while it's been in my possession. Let's talk about the history of the company, because it is an interesting history. Here is the man himself, Webster Clay Ball. What a name. They don't make names like that anymore, unfortunately. Old Webster was a jeweler and watchmaker in Cleveland, Ohio in the late 19th century. He was actually the man that brought American Standard Time to Cleveland when it was introduced in the late 1880s. In the early 1890s, there was a head-on train crash nearby, and Webster, our man, was sent to investigate the cause, which turned out to be one of the train's engineers' watch had been running slowly. There had been confusion, which had led to a crash. Thereafter, he was employed by the railway and introduced a new set of timekeeping standards to all of the railway's operations. He ensured that all railwaymen's watches were accurate to within 30 seconds a fortnight, and they were tested every single fortnight and reset to standard time to ensure that accidents like that wouldn't happen in the future. He then became deeply involved in the railways for the rest of his life. According to Wikipedia, he was the vice president of Hamilton at one point in his career. Now, what the Wikipedia site doesn't tell you is that Ball then pretty much collapsed during the quartz crisis of the 70s and 80s. The family held on to the brand name until the 90s. It was then sold to a Hong Kong-based company, Asia Commercial Holdings Limited. That's who the owners are today, but these watches are all made in Switzerland. Now, this may be the first ball to appear on the channel, but I've had a good look at the brand before with a view to buying one, because tritium at this quality level is a rarity, and it really is the sole preserve of Ball watches. The problem I found is that the styling of them is all a bit kitchen sink like, if you ask me. I mean, how many more details could they have squeezed onto the dial and case of that watch? They're all a bit 12 out of 10, if you know what I mean, with the exception of the Fireman range. It has always been the one that has appealed to me, not only because it's the cheapest, but because it is the most simple in terms of the design, but keeping, crucially, those tritium tubes. And here, behind several layers of green cardboard, is Jeffrey's Ball Fireman Victory. So the Fireman Victory appears to be a relatively recent addition to the Fireman range of watches. These are around 1200 USD, a bit less than that on JOMASHOP. That was the cheapest price I could find. I will leave a link to that one in the description of the video. A whole bunch of different dial patterns and colours to choose from. There's a plain black, there's a sunburst silver, and there are various etched and cross-hatched versions, including this rather striking blue one. Now, just because I said that the Fireman was the simplest of the range, it doesn't mean to say that it's a simple looking watch. There is plenty going on here, even without that cross-hatched blue dial. Plenty of high polished surfaces to catch and play with the light. There's a kind of complex looking bracelet here. So if you are in for one of these, if you want a GADA watch with tritium tubes, then you're going to have to be okay with all of this going on around it. Great proportions, great dimensions, though it's a classic 40-20, so 40mm in diameter, 20mm lug width. Very slim though, 11.5mm thick, 48.5 lug to lug. Now that is perhaps a couple of mil longer than the 40mm diameter would normally be accompanied by. You can see quite a distinct long vintage style lug with downturn there, explaining that slightly long lug to lug distance. No taper on the bracelet here. It is pretty much 19.5 all the way round, and sized up for me, I removed one half link to get it to fit my 7-inch wrist. It weighs in at 143 grams, so it's a dressy looking watch, very much in that sports watch stainless steel sweet spot, around 150 grams. And it has all of the specifications that you would hope for from a watch at or around $1,000 in this style. Now they do a couple of 904L stainless steel watches a la Rolex, but this one isn't. It is just standard 316L stainless steel. So 316L stainless steel case, crown, bezel. It's a kind of two-step bezel here. I'll show you a close-up on that. It's quite interesting in a minute or two. Full stainless steel bracelet with solid end links, and these are screw links. Now, butterfly clasp. I'll come back to that a bit later on. Double-domed sapphire crystal. Screw-down crown, 100 meters of water resistance, which is always the forget about it level. It's very nicely finished, circular brush to those upper lugs. Everything else is high polished, including that two-stepped bezel that I mentioned. Really nicely integrated piece of sapphire crystal there as well. The whole thing looks very well done. High polished sides, there's a chamfered edge there, and a large crown with the double R, I assume that means railroad logo on there. There's also reference to the railroad on the dial as well, and on the caseback they're really going for that heritage play there, with numerous railroad references from the name of the watch to the dial to the caseback and that crown. The bracelet is very interesting. I haven't seen anything quite like this before. So high polish on the side, nice smooth transition to a very fine majority brushed upper surface. Although as you can see, there's a high polished center section. If I flip the bracelet over to the back, you can see what they've done. So it's two links. These are kind of two links, not three link. It looks like three link from the back, but if you flip it back to the top, you can see that the brush link runs all the way end to end, and it's that center link that is high polished and overlaps between those brush links. Very interesting. I do quite like it, but like I said, you're going to have to get used to a bit of light play with this one, generally speaking. Butterfly clasp, kind of standard butterfly clasp with the ball logo just etched in there, and you do just have to pop it open and pop it closed again. But let's get back to the dial, because it is very, very nice indeed. This whole watch certainly feels like a grand's worth, and no mistake, you would not feel shortchanged getting this one out of the box and putting it on your wrist for the first time. It has a feel of quality and it has a real look of quality. That dial is just gorgeous, I must say. So applied indexes all the way around. No differentiation between the indexes. They are all the same. Well, they're all the same with the lights on. I'll show you it with the lights off in just a second. The ball logo is applied there, high polished silver. Official standard since 1891, just printed on, and automatic 100 meters, 330 feet, also just printed on. And you can see down either side of the index at 6 there, Swiss made, and just to the left of the index at 7, T25, again denoting those tritium tubes. There is a date complication on this watch. It has been integrated at the 4:30. It is framed rather nicely though by a beveled edge frame, and you can see under macro, this blue dial is gorgeous. Look at all those little pyramids on the dial. So there's a heap of texture here as well as colour and depth. That square pyramid pattern extends all the way to the edge of the indexes, and there's a smooth minute track around the outer edge there. Very nice Dauphine handset, high polished, faceted down the middle, and with large tritium tubes running the length of the minute and the hour hand. Very simple needle second hand, with again that double R logo on the counterbalance. There's plenty going on, but it's all very, very nicely done. I think it looks great. But that was day, this is night. This really is the reason why you buy a ball over a similarly priced and similarly spec'd watch from another big Swiss brand. It is these lovely tritium tubes. 14 of them on this particular model, one on each of the indexes and one on each of the hour and the minute hand. Now green all the way around, there's a orange at the 12 and orange on the hands. Now there's no point in me starting off slowly and then cranking up the speed so that you can watch them fade, because they aren't going to fade for a very long time. time. This is T25. They have a half-life of 25 years. They're little mineral glass tubes filled with a tritium isotope which reacts to the mineral glass. But don't worry, the radiation does not extend beyond the glass. The glow most certainly does though. It's all very well in isolation, but let's put it head to head against a loomed dive watch and you can really see these tubes come into their own. It's the SKX, everybody's favourite, or at least a decent reference point for all. Initially, the SKX looks far more impressive than the Tritium, glowing brightly with that Seiko's proprietary LumiBright. But if I crank the speed up on this one, by the time we get to about 10 minutes, you can see that the lume is fading fast, whereas the Tritium is just coming into its own. And at the end of the 20-minute test period, the lume is gone. Those little tubes are glowing magnificently. Now if I unscrew a link in the bracelet, I can show you the screw-on Caseback, where another railroad reference awaits us. Steam train heading for us with a nice little plaque on the front of it there. You can just about make out the text, Webb C. Ball. So another reference to the man who founded the brand. Again, very nicely embossed here. The whole thing does feel like a $1,000 watch, and no mistake. Apparently this watch is also rated to take shocks of 5,000 Gs. That's what the shock resistance reference on the Caseback is. I assume that means the case. I'm not sure that the movement necessarily feels that way. What is the movement? Well, they call it a Ball automatic caliber R1103. To you and I, it's an ETA 2824. I'm not quite sure what grade of 2824 they use here, and again, with deference to Jeffrey, I didn't feel the need to take the Caseback off and find out. Besides, I do not need to take the Caseback off to tell you that this one is running like a champ. And it looks good on wrist as well, I must say. Plenty happening, all of those high polished surfaces, the hands, the indexes, the bezel, and those mid links of the bracelet as well. Looks great. Wears big for a 40, I must say though. Lots of dial space, which always gives a watch more presence, relatively speaking. Quite a long lug-to-lug, 48.5. I've got a 7-inch wrist for your reference. No problems at all. As you can see there from the side profile, those lugs do turn down very nicely, but they could probably have trimmed a mil off either side just to make it more wearable for people with smaller wrists than I have. That's the overhead shot. Perhaps this blue texture dial, not the most legible option. If you want legibility, maybe the black with the silver hands is probably the way to go, but it does look good, doesn't it? And it's the same outside as well. Those textured patterns, those little pyramids really do pop off the dial, don't they? Perhaps not enough anti-reflective undercoating though. A consistent moan of mine. Maybe they could have done with a couple of extra layers. And that's it on wrist. You can see what I mean about the slightly long lug to lug, relatively speaking, for that 40mm diameter, but they do curve downwards. It does wear well. And bear in mind, no taper on that bracelet. It is pretty much 20 all the way around the wrist. Now, in one of Jeffrey's emails to me, he said he couldn't find any fault with the watch. I checked the warranty card. He picked this one up in November, so he's still in that glorious honeymoon phase. Sorry, Jeffrey, if you didn't want faults, you shouldn't have sent it to me because I find fault in everything. Just ask my wife. I'm not going to go on about the styling too much. You know, it is a little bit glitzy. You need to be okay with that. I mean, look at that counterbalance, for example, but assuming that you are okay with that look, I reckon this Fireman Victory model pulls it off. I do have a couple of complaints though. The crown is quite large and it does rather jut out. Check the size of that crown tube. It is, relatively speaking, enormous. You squeeze it back in and you're screwing 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 for ages before it goes back down. If you wear your watches loose, that could dig into the wrist. It's not a sharp crown, but they could probably have trimmed a mil or two off that, no problems at all. Now this is box fresh, which may explain why the butterfly clasp is a bit stiff, but there's no pre-release mechanism here. You do just have to yank both sides off, which is a little bit more agricultural than I would have expected for a watch as dressy as this one. A millimetre off the lugs on either side, I think, would just have helped it wear slightly better on wrist and probably have helped it integrate slightly better with the bracelet end link as well. And my last moan is the date complication down there at 4:30. I understand why they've done it. It's to retain the integrity of the dial and ensure after dark that they have one tritium tube on each of those indexes. You wouldn't get that if they put it at 3 or at 6, but a date complication at 4:30 never looks quite as well integrated as one at 3 or at 6. but it is a cracking looking watch. It really is, and it feels like a quality item as well. It feels like $1,200 well spent, and of course those tritium tubes are just an added bonus. Let's be honest, the difference between tritium and lume is night and day. So there you have it, the Ball Fireman Victory. If you have a taste for tritium but want it in a classy package that really can go anywhere and do anything, then I reckon one of these balls is a fantastic option for you. I had always feared that the styling was a little bit 12 out of 10. Perhaps it's only 10.5 out of 10. I will definitely consider one in the coming weeks and months if I cannot find something more economical. Thank you again, Jeffrey, much appreciated. You have opened Pandora's box and I know I'll never be able to close it again. Thanks for watching. I will see you all in a future video that may or may not contain tritium.